don't have a nice loud speaking voice. I have a really quiet little voice, so I'm going to use this microphone and hopefully everybody can hear me. If you can't hear me in the back, just get my attention somehow back there and we'll go. So, does anybody know what this building is? It's up there now. Anybody recognize that? Some of us old timers? Well, we'll get to it. Anyway, the idea of this program came to me about a year ago when Mary Ruley and I were hosting at the museum, and a fellow came in from down Kentway or something and was doing research on historic resorts in the state, and I thought that sounded like an interesting topic, and I asked him if he would like to do a program for us sometime, and he said sure. So several months ago I tried to get a hold of him. He gave me his contact information, email and phone, and I left messages and I never heard back. But I still thought it sounded like an interesting topic. So I thought, well, I'll just see what I can find on my own for Snohomish County. And it was amazing what's out there, the material that's out there. So I'm restricting it more to East Snohomish County now. Anyway, and by resort, I mean something more than a hotel on the river. It's got to be some kind of a destination with a place you can stay, whether it's a cabin or a lodge, and offer some kind of recreation for the visitor. And the establishment of the resorts in the area was to a large part the result of the outdoor recreation and adventure popularity of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And, oops, how did I get off topic here? Excuse me. Let me go back. I'm not real techy, as you can tell. Okay, here we are. This is a picture of the Mountaineers on Mount Rainier. They were established early on in the late 1800s. You gotta love these women wearing these skirts and these bonnets and everything up there. Anyway, this was part of the popularity of outdoor recreation starting in the late 1800s. The Everett branch of the Mountaineers was established in 1909. And as soon as the automobiles became more accessible, automobile touring became popular. Resorts were often a popular destination. One on the left here is John Austin reading a map out somewhere they're probably lost. And the picture on the right is actually a group out on the Stevens Pass Highway out in the Index area. Nice road. And it was a good idea to travel as a group because if something happened, you had a backup to get somewhere then. So I'm going to start out with a few of the lowland lake resorts, which were for the most part small and catered to fishermen. And you have to bear in mind at this time, there were no fishing accesses on lakes. All the land was privately owned around the lake. So if you wanted to go fishing, you had to access it through private property. So the first resort in the area on the lake was started by Richard Rossiger, who had homesteaded on what became Lake Rossiger in 1887. And by the very early 1900s, he had people tent camping at his place and renting his boat. This soon became a business that took a lot of his time and energy, but he enjoyed socializing with the visitors, many being well-to-do people from Seattle. In his book about him in 1907, he noted in his journal charging 75 cents per day for horse feed, boat rental, and camping spot. People had to pack everything in, and there was not even a road at that time in, so you had to pack everything in. 1912, he built his first boathouse, pictured here, and had some crude cabins available for rent. In 1922, he built a new row of improved cabins, here, seen here, and he was charging 25 cents per hour or $1 a day for boat rental. He sold a few basic items out of the back of his house and did a brisk business selling his hard cider, which I guess had quite a kick. It was real popular. But he eventually got in trouble with the law. He wasn't supposed to be selling this hard cider, and he had to switch to non-alcoholic. This photo here is of a Masons group out at the resort in 1923. Lawrence Whitfield's in here somewhere. It was in his collection of pictures, but he was in this group there somewhere. That was one of the groups that Richard Rossiger really liked dealing with. Okay. Richard died in 1946, and his son Salon, who's pictured here, and his wife Gladys took over and ran the resort for many years. This is a picture. This is Richard's wife, Anna Rossiger, there, shown behind the photo, or behind the cabins. And those of you who've been at the park notice that this is exactly where the swimming beach is at Lake Rossiger Park now. And all that land where she's standing was hauled in there by hand by Richard Rodigan. It was actually a marshy area. And over years and years, he just hauled logs and rocks and dirt down in there and filled that whole area in. Okay. Sometime in the 1960s, the county purchased the land, and I'm not really sure. There's conflicting information. Some say as early as 1938 that the county was involved, but it's more likely it was the 1960s. They purchased a lot of the land and turned it into Rossiger County Park. Also during the early days, there was a resort at the upper end of the lake called Hafer's End of Lake Resort. And I don't have any nice pictures of Lecky's Beach Resort that was on Flowing Lake, but they advertised every week in the Monroe Monitor. It operated on Flowing Lake from 1925 to 1960. It was owned by the Lecky family of Everett. It offered, in addition to fishing and boat rentals, a sandy swimming beach, a dock, a small store, canoes, tent camping, and a few rustic cabins. In 1954, Ramigio and Linny Gianelli were listed as the proprietors. In the 1940s, the Leckys planted 8 evergreen trees near the beach, which you may recognize. You've been to the beach. Those were planted to form a wedding circle for their daughter's wedding ceremony. Unfortunately, the wedding did not end up there, but in 2008, their grandson, Gary Lecky, was married there. So it came full circle there. In 1968, Snohomish County Parks purchased the 30-acre property and soon after started developing what is now Flowing Lake Park. A later effort at Flowing Lake was the Laz Brothers Wonderland Resort across from Lecky's. They had come from Chicago in 1946 with high hopes for a family resort. With ceaseless work over years, the resort finally did boast a first-class dance floor, boats, canoes, swimming, baseball diamonds, horseshoes, a recreation hall, and other things. But it turned out they were in the wrong place at the wrong time to make a financial go of it, and the resort closed for the last time in 1962. The state was developing free fishing accesses at local lakes during the 1950s, which kind of put an end to a lot of these resorts, a lot of the draw for these resorts. And people had other options for recreation, including television, which staying home watching television really put a dent in a lot of this outdoor activity. Also, they were in the perfect weather convergence zone, if you know what that is. And the 1950s were the coldest decade in 80 years, with 1950 being the coldest year on record. Bob Laz, in his book he wrote called Wonderland Park, he often lamented about the horrible weather they had there all the time, that he felt that there was just a constant rain cloud hanging over the resort there. But one advantage they had with the cold weather was they had cold enough winters that they were able to back dump trucks full of sand over the ice on the frozen lake and dump it, kind of strew it around so that when the ice melted, they had a nice sandy bottom to the swimming area there. Also during this time, cars were reliable enough that people began to drive to eastern Washington, which had better summer resort weather. Here's another picture of what Bob Laz said was one of the rare busy days at the resort there. They had that great slide out into the lake there. So closer to Monroe, and a lot tinier, was the Cedar Ponds Resort, Stanley Dotson proprietor. This small establishment, a couple miles off Ben Howard Road, operated from the 1940s to 1960. Primarily a fishing destination, the resort also boasted nice picnic grounds, a small store, and a swimming area with a large slide that went out over the small lake. That's one of the typical cabins there. Here's a picture of the store, quite a store. Also, what we got here? Oops, back up. The Monroe Monitor Society page often noted so-and-so going to Cedar Ponds for a picnic. For instance, on September 29, 1956, the paper noted Mr. and Mrs. Charles Wagner camped at Cedar Ponds Saturday and Sunday with a technocrat group who were there for a shake-splitting bee. And I thought that sounded kind of interesting, having a shake-splitting bee. I'd never heard of them before. A 1954 directory also lists under resorts Frank's Evergreen Resort, Lake Rossiter, Alexander's Resort, Stone Lake. Now this one had started out in 1920 as Adams Resort and had a popular dance hall, which burned down. Bridges Resort, Panther Lake, Hanks Place, Storm Lake, and River Edge Park startup. And a lot of those, like I say, closed because suddenly there was free fishing access and people didn't need to pay for a resort to go in and rent a boat or anything. So now I'll get into some larger mountain resorts, starting with a few east out of Granite Falls. I'll get back to this picture. This is a Canyon Creek Lodge, which opened in 1918 on an old homestead northeast of Granite Falls and was known for its beautiful lodge, which is a pretty beautiful spot. There were also handsome cabins with fireplaces which rented for $5 to $6 a day, which included meals. The resort had an excellent reputation far beyond Snohomish County and billed itself as a tranquil place to vacation in the wild with fishing, camping, hiking, horseback riding, and golf. From 1918 to 1930, it was run by Quincy Mueller, wife of Granite Falls merchant Joseph Mueller. Starting in 1930, the new owners made improvements, but most of their grand plans never materialized. At its height in 1936, it received a visit from Edith Roosevelt, widow of Theodore Roosevelt. On February 10, 1938, a fire completely destroyed the main lodge. It was quickly rebuilt, but the new resort never recovered from a second fire in the 1960s, and all that remains today are a few stones. Next, I'll move up the river a bit to a lodge that's better known, the Big Four Inn, which is 24 miles east of Granite Falls. This was the brainchild of Wyatt and Bethel Stuck Rucker, who owned the Hartford Railroad that ran to Monte Cristo. After taking note of all the tourists who rode the train for the scenery, they decided to build a resort, which opened July 2nd, 1921, and operated year-round. There's a nice snowy picture of it. There's another picture in the snow. We got a couple sports up on the mounds of snow there. So it did operate all year round. In addition to the 3-story lodge with 53 rooms, there were several cabins. Pictures of cabins. Those cabins are on the north side of the lodge there. The creek there, that's Perry Creek that they dammed up, and somehow they had a hydroelectric project there that supplied the power to the inn. There's another picture of the front of the cabins there with the sidewalk along it. There's another picture of the cabins. They went in this odd square surrounding the inn. The price was $6 for two to stay, which included finely prepared meals. The resort had its own power plant, a 9-hole golf course, shown here, tennis courts, and an artificial lake. They also had a bridge across the Stillaguamish there to access the ice caves, where the bridge is today. Each room, including the cabins, had hot and cold running water. Visitors, including many celebrities, came from all over the world. Here's a picture of the lobby. Note that the draperies there on the windows there, they come in later. Celebrities were encouraged to sign their names on the lobby walls, which apparently many did. Access to the inn was by what were called gas cars. There were these funky looking things here. Buses that were designed to run on railroad tracks. And I remembered from years ago, we had a program on Monte Cristo, and Grace Kerwin was there, and she remembered as a child going up to this inn and riding on that car, and she said it was the best part of the whole trip was riding on that car there and back. The resort began falling on hard times during the Depression, and the railroad line was becoming too expensive to maintain, and it was removed in 1936. And any of you who've been up in the Rogue Canyon know how disastrous it is of a place to have put a railroad through there, so it was constant work. Anyway, it was removed in 1936, making the only access to the inn a dirt track for the last several miles. The Mountain Loop Highway was not completed until 1941. For part of World War II, the resort was taken over by the Coast Guard as a rest and recuperation facility. After the war, notice that the draperies are the same as in that picture of the lobbies there, so they didn't change them at all. After the war, I've lost my place here. New owners tried to keep the resort going, but the deteriorating buildings, you can see by the picture here, they're starting to look a little shabby. It was a great liability, and the inn closed. On September 7th, 1949, the main lodge and its annex were completely destroyed by fire, and the cabins were removed soon after. All that remains today is the fireplace, which we can all see when we go up to the Big Four picnic area. It's still there. Short mention here, youngsters were not left out of the resort era. There were a number of camps in the area. This photo here is of the Sahali Inn, or I guess you'd call it more of it was a campfire girls retreat, a mile above Big Four at the base of Mount Dickerman. The lodge opened in 1925 and it was called an idyllic spot for girls to escape, and in quotes, the dangers of civilization. The foundation is still there. Fred Kruger at Granite Falls since he's found it. It's along the Mountain Loop Highway there near the Mount Dickerman access. So I'll have to go out and look for it sometime. And the name Sahali is the same Sahali that's used on the Monroe High School yearbook, the Sahali, meaning high up place or something there. The Boy Scouts also had a camp nearby at Lake Kelsima, which if you've ever been up there, it's a beautiful spot. So from a slightly later era, we have the Monte Cristo Inn at the old town site, shown here in its heyday in 1964. The main structure was quite old, having been the Boston American Cookhouse during the town's second boom in 1914. It was purchased by Dell and Rosemary Wilkie in July 1951 and converted to a lodge. They scavenged materials from around the old town site and built cabins, some of which remain today. The Wilkies sold the resort in 1963, after which it went through a succession of owners, including at one time Ken Shalati from Monroe here, some with grand plans for the area, including making a ski destination resort. And I have this newspaper thing here that I picked up in Monte Cristo when I was there in 1965, and inside there's an interesting thing on what they were hoping to do. And I'll read a little bit of that here. It says, your hosts have determined from the start to do everything reasonably possible for your comfort and enjoyment. We pledge ourselves to do all in the interest of the public good, to their entertainment and recreation while visiting Monte Cristo. By serving you, we can best assure the success of our investment here, all of us being either business or professional men, knowing from experience that we are the servants of the public. Every worthwhile project is the fruition of men's ambition, dreams, and personal energies. They had quite the plan. We have big plans and dreams for Monte Cristo. We will apply ourselves unsparingly and unceasingly to make those dreams come true. Things lacking here now are only due to lack of time and commitment to rectify. We plan to move full speed ahead. And it's signed H.C. Hofer, Dick Marquardt, Willard Cheddar, and Ken Shalati. But unfortunately, the plans, they didn't do a darn thing. So. Yeah, you can see by the little flyer here that was on the side there that they rented rooms upstairs in the lodge. They had the cabins, they had doubles and singles. Camping was free at the Forest Camp across the river. And meals Saturday and Sunday, family style. Let's see here. Okay, the lodge included a dining room. It was known for its Saturday and Sunday dinners. High water on the Sauk River in December 1980 washed out the access road, and in March 1983, the old building, a victim of arson, burned to the ground. I was lucky enough to have visited this place a number of times growing up and later. And the place inside, it was like a museum inside because they had salvaged all the stuff from around the town site. And I always thought it was real fascinating to go inside and look at the stuff. And it was a nice lodge. I was really sad when it burned down. Now I'm going to move over to the Skykomish Valley and start with the Garland Mineral Springs Resort. Does anybody here remember going to this thing? No? Didn't have resort goers there. There's a good chance this was the first place you might call a resort in this area. Carrie Starr, the wife of Dr. J.N. Starr of Chicago, had a bad knee and was advised to move away from the cold weather in Chicago. So they moved to Snohomish in 1888, and soon after the doctor heard about some mineral springs on the North Fork of the Skykomish River. He found a guide, packed in, because this was long before the railroad was in there, and ended up building a few cabins there in 1888, and in May 1889 brought his wife up. At first not impressed, she soon found that her knee was very much improved. And finally in May 1896, they secured a grant for the land and owned it for many years, welcoming many visitors to the healing waters. It was known originally as Soda Springs and then Star Hot Springs. Unfortunately, there's not any real early photos. And a little later, it was named Garland Mineral Springs in honor of an early prospector there, A.H. Burt Garland. The only photo we have, this was a picture that was found at the University of Washington Special Collections, and they didn't know what it was. On the back, it said 1901 Star Soda Springs, 7 miles from camp. So this was before there was any road up there. I imagine these people dressed like that, hiked all the way up there to the springs. This is an early picture of the road up to Garland Hot Springs. A beautiful road, a little winding, but nice. So by 1930, there was a new lodge, and as well as many other amenities, like the full-size pool was built. This is a 1935 picture of the lodge with the pool. You can see a few cabins out there. After World War II, the property was bought by Ralph Taylor of Wenatchee, and in 1953 it was purchased by Cameron and Medora Sharp and her sister Laura May Mooney for use as a youth camp and a place for church conferences. They never got the church conferences going or the youth camp, so it stayed open to everyone as a resort. There were originally 4 springs. The largest has water about 115 degrees, is pretty murky in color, and has a strong mineral smell. It was the one that was piped into the pool, by which time it had cooled considerably and a lot of the odor had gone away. The second spring was similar, but not as strong, and it was the one that visitors sampled to drink when they came up there. The third spring was a soda spring, and the fourth spring was actually carbonated and was used in the lodge for making carbonated beverages and floats. This is a poor copy of the postcard that was handed out in the lodge there. A slightly better picture. This is a picture of the lodge. This was 3 stories, had 20 rooms, and a full basement where the showers and heating plant were. And I'm going to quote Fred Seifert, who was a 1950s regular. He says, the front door opened into a cozy front room with a large fireplace. There were several stuffed animal heads hanging on the walls. The walls and ceiling were paneled with knotty pine. Beyond the living room was a spacious dining room where they served delicious chicken dinners every Sunday for $1.50 a plate. Also on the first floor was the kitchen with a walk-in refrigerator. The coffee shop was accessible from a door near the pool. Let's see. And you kind of see from this picture of the pool, the coffee shop there's the stairs leading up to the coffee shop there. There were also several cabins for rent. Find one here. This is cabin number 1. It was known for its peaked roof there. Also had kids' play equipment, a warm kiddie pool, and horseback riding. A flood in 1959 did severe damage to the property, but the killing blow came in January 1961 when the lodge burned completely. Largely abandoned soon after, the site became a bit of a hangout, this is when I knew it, for young people who squatted in the remaining cabins. More recent flooding has taken out most of the cabins and the actual site where the lodge and the pool were. The river is doing what a lot of the rivers are doing up there now. It's called ribboning, where it's just winding all through the floodplain area. And it's not a large part of the river, but it's just really making a mess up there. This would make a great program on its own, because there's just so much information out there on this resort, and there's so many people out there who remember it, and it's still in the Sharp family's ownership, and some of them live in Everett. And there's an original, quite a long narrative by Mrs. Starr of the old days out there when it was still the Starr Resort. And there's even a 20-minute video online from the Mooney family from the 1950s out there, with horseback riding and playing and whatnot. There's an amazing amount of information out there on this lodge. It would be fun to have a program. So I'll move up the highway a bit to a resort I didn't even know existed until recently, which was the Miller River Inn, which is just a short ways west of Skykomish. It was operated for a few decades by Millard Fillmore Smith, who was also the local postmaster. It offered lodging, camping, fishing, and hiking. There's a picture of their advertisement. I suppose you can read it there. It says, "Nature's paradise amid the snow-capped peaks and wild trout streams of the magnificent Cascade Mountains, an ideal place to spend your vacation. Make your reservations now." There's also a screenshot of an article from the Monroe Monitor here. I'll read that. Miller River, this is from May 1926. Miller River Inn is getting in shape for the season's run of tourists, which find this one of the best places on the line, and they mean Great Northern Line by that, to make their base. The Monroe editor had a short visit recently with the proprietor of this popular resort, M.F. Smith, who also functions as the Nasby of this little place, as well as Rooning, the only store. I think they meant running. And so he serves the local crowd day in and out, and also takes ample care of the needs of all the tourists, and reports having had such business from time to time from nearly every state in the Union. Miller River Inn is the official name of this resort, situated in a wonderful region for scenery where the water is good and the fishing is fine. They didn't go in for real strong superlatives here. It's just good and fine. I only have a couple other photos from this, the kind of blurry picture of the lodge in the winter, and then a picture of the tent cabins you had for rent there on the site. Okay, at the further end of the valley, get the picture up here, it's at another very early resort, Scenic Hot Springs Resort, which at this time was known as Great Northern Springs Resort, Hot Springs Resort. And here I'm just going to quote from an article by Warren Carlson that appeared in the index wall called "The Rise and Fall of Scenic Hot Springs Hotel." And he says, "This stop, roughly 7 miles east of Skykomish, may have been the first destination resort in the state." And this is a claim that's used over and over again. The hot springs itself is said to have been discovered by John Stevens and C.F.B. Haskell as they surveyed for the routing of the Great Northern Railroad around 1890. Within a few years of the rail line being completed in 1893, it actually opened in 1892, an impressive 3-story establishment was called the Great Northern Hot Springs opened to serve a public seeking healing waters. A brochure published early on stated, "No other medicinal water in the West is so effective for the cure of rheumatism, stomach, liver, bladder, blood, and skin diseases." A 1903 Seattle PI article noted that J.V. Prosser and George Murphy had purchased the property from I.G. McCain and planned to expand the hotel capacity from 50 to 100 and rename it Scenic Hot Springs Hotel. And by golly, they did. You see, they added on to it here and renamed it. The expanded building had oak finishing, electric lights, steam heat, and an excellent dining room service. Guests could play billiards, lawn tennis, handball, croquet, and basketball. There's another view of the building. I'll use my laser pointer here. There's a little scaffolding starting here, and you can see in a later picture what that is. And we also have, this is a postcard view. This is the postcard they have available at the lodge here. The water from the hot springs, which were well up the hill, came through wooden pipes. On November 9th, 1908, the recently remodeled hotel burned to the ground once again. It's burned to the ground. Amazingly, within 6 months, a new hotel in a Swiss chalet design was built and opened. To quote again, throughout its lifetime, Scenic Hot Springs Hotel was a summer and winter resort with regular train service and at times special weekend trains from Seattle and Everett. A little picture of a panorama view of the train coming through the valley there. As you can see, this is where that scaffolding, they built a little bridge out to the railroad. Although this is the depot there, the scenic depot, so I don't know how the train let people off to go there, whether to let them off at the depot or that little scaffold, that little bridge they built there. In addition to healing waters, brochures at the time touted fishing, hunting, cross-country skiing, berry picking, camping, and picnicking. There's backs of a couple of postcards there. Mr. J.V. Prosser announces the completion of his modern Swiss chalet hotel, Scenic Hot Springs, on the main line of the Great Northern Railway. Complete with steam heat, electric light, hot and cold water in every room, and concrete bath departments with modern equipment. Oddly, these two postcards were available on eBay at different times, but they were mailed on the same day by the same person because it's got the same writing and they went to different places, but somehow they both ended up on eBay. So one of those odd coincidences, I guess. Here's a view of the lobby. Nice little lobby, nice fireplace. In February, as kind of a side note here, in February 1910, the hotel became a staging area for rescue and recovery efforts from the Wellington avalanche disaster. So they brought the bodies in here as well as the people needing to get out, because this is as far as the train could get at that time. The hotel continued to be a summer and winter destination until 1928, when it was literally covered by the Great Northern Railroad being rerouted for the new tunnel under Stevens Pass. I mean, there's still people here, and the rocks are coming in, so I don't know whether it was people who were working on the railroad or whether it was actual tourists, I don't know. So that was the demise of that place. The hot springs still exist, and during the 1980s and 90s became an informal destination for those of us who knew how to find it. Including Karen back there. Karen, right? She knew how to find it. This picture from the 90s. Ignoring the no trespassing signs, people constructed a deck and tubs. The hottest tub at 115 degrees was known as the lobster pot. Eventually the sheriff's department shut it down. It wasn't the owners who were concerned about it, but the sheriff's department really didn't like people going up there. They destroyed what was built. The property owner has since constructed a small cabin and has made the springs available to the public for a fee, and you have to do it by reservation. So I'm going to end with a bit about Camp Houston, or as it's now known, the Houston Conference Center. This is another one that could have its own show, just because there are so many great stories from the place with the kids camping here. It started out about 1925, and Mrs. Leota White deeded St. John Episcopal Church in Snohomish 5 acres on the Wallace River in honor of her husband, Charles White. The parish worked hard to develop the property, which was used for picnicking, parish outings, and youth events. A few cabins were constructed there beginning in 1927, a little too close to the river, and they slid right in the river. In 1931, the Reverend Walter Horn of St. John purchased another 5+ acres from Mrs. White and invited Camp Houston, a boys' camping outreach program, which was supported by Bishop Houston, to use their site for their annual boys' camp. This annual event, open to all denominations, became very popular, stressing spiritual, intellectual, and physical development. Much of the physical involved improving the site. They set those boys to work building everything on there. So by 1935, there were 8 more cabins, you can see here, including a girls' cabin. 1935 was the first year they invited girls. Here's a group of the girls looking very happy at camp. A swimming pond, a new chapel, a small store, an open exercise center, and other structures. The following year, a 3-story lodge was opened. I don't know how much they had the boys working on this, but it was. They also had a new water system, which included a large mash tank that was donated by the county sheriffs after they raided an old still that was demolished. Building materials were often donated, with Frank Wagner of Monroe being one of the largest donors. Activities varied depending on what chaperone was volunteering, and some of them were known to be rather hazardous. In 1940, Father Horn personally purchased the remaining 55 acres of Mrs. White's holdings, who again stipulated that the property must continue as a youth camp or revert to her heirs, which is why it is still a youth camp today. This picture here shows one of the first swimming ponds that was constructed by the campers. And it was later named for Peter Minks, who had been involved with the place and was a casualty of World War II. The other photo here includes a picture of Bishop Houston in the back, or the tall fellow in the back, and the person on the right here is the Reverend Horn, who loved this place so much that when he retired, he had a small cabin built on the property, and he lived there the rest of his days. In 1949, St. John deeded the property to the Diocese of Olympia, and discussion began about making the site a year-round destination. Things continued as usual until 1967, when it was determined that many of the structures were in very poor condition, and the state condemned the lodge as unsafe. A new lodge was completed in the spring of 1972, and youth camps restarted. In 1973, the new Wallace Falls State Park took part of the property. In 1949, the Bonneville Power Administration also took a big chunk of the property for those transmission lines that go through that area. One of the newer pools, not sure if it's the present one, was financed by the Cedar Green family of Snohomish. The following decades have seen major improvements, and today it is a first-class conference center. There's the new pool. And it's available. On the right is the new meeting center, much nicer than the old lodge. And it's available for nonprofits like the Monroe Historical Society at pretty reasonable rates. And I've heard from people who've been up there that the meals are really good. I think I have time here to tell one story from the Camp Houston. Quite a while back, probably in the 1930s, there was a log jam on the river that could have caused some major problems, so there was concern about it. The county fire warden at the time, Jack Edmondson, suggested that they burn the logs out of the way. The camp counselors had a contest to see which camper could make the biggest fire, handing each boy a bulrush soaked in kerosene. I mean, this was in the middle of the summer, so what could go wrong, right? Needless to say, the boys were very enthusiastic, but the wind shifted and soon they had a full-fledged forest fire. Since the fire warden had suggested the idea, he couldn't very well blame the camp. Anyway, so in ending, I'd like to thank the many people who made available information and photos, including the Sharp family, Fred Kruger and the Granite Falls Historical Society, Skykomish Historical Society, UW Special Collections, the Everett Public Library, the Oregon Historical Library, Katie Sue Eichner of Camp Houston, and many more whose efforts to save history are so appreciated. I also have a bunch of books up here, other stuff that go into these resorts much more if anybody'd like to take a look at them. And that's all I have for right now. So, got any questions? If anybody has any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. Tammy?
I have a question. Can you go back to the Miller resort? So I
Sure.
have a question about a word that was used in a newspaper article. It was the word, I believe, NASB, N-A-S-B.
NASB, yes.
What does that mean?
Oh, yeah.
Or is it someone's name? Or is it
Yeah. I assume it's he runs the town, I guess, or something. I don't really know. It's capitalized too, so I don't know.
That's what I'm curious.
Yeah.
Has anyone heard of that term before?
Yeah.
It's a mystery.
Okay. Yes?
What resort did you say the Coast Guard took over?
Who took over?
You said Coast Guard.
Oh, the Coast Guard. That was the Big Four Inn.
I'm gonna go back to
And
that
when
one.
was that?
That was during World War II.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the military took over a lot of facilities, and this was one of them. Yeah. Uh-huh. Anything else? Anybody?
What year was the fire where the fire warden gave them kerosene?
Oh. We don't know exactly. It's probably in the 1930s, like that. There's this book that's I got called The History of Camp Houston, and this woman who wrote it, Ann Payne, she had a good sense of humor because she's got some great funny, and that wasn't the only funny story in there. There were some good stories about things happening.
Was that in Snohomish, the Big 4 Inn?
That was on the Mountain Loop Highway out of Granite Falls, about 27 miles east of Granite Falls, up there, yeah. And you can still go, it's a picnic area now, you can still go there and see the fireplace. Yeah.
Where was the Mineral Springs one? Where is that actually located?
Oh, the Mineral Springs. Let's look through these.
That's out of about 7-8 miles out of Index on the Index Galena Road, and they just last November they fixed the road back up. It had washed out in the 90s, and you can go up there now. The Sharp family still owns the property, and they say they don't mind people going there as long as you respect the property and don't make a mess of it or anything. And, yeah. I had heard that when, I don't know if it was the Forest Service or who it was working on a road above the springs, that they damaged one of them and it stopped running, but the Sharp family says no, they're still there. Tammy?
So in putting some Facebook posts on about Lake Rossiger for this event, a lot of people shared information, which was really cool.
Uh-huh.
I'm curious, I know that book exists about Richard,
Yeah.
and I'm curious, just knowing someone that has an actual cabin there that was in their family, at what point did they open it up for people to have their own places and like sell off some of that waterfront?
Oh, well, oddly, in the 1880s, the whole area was homesteaded.
Oh, okay.
But then the timber companies came in, the logging companies came in and bought up most of those homesteads.
Okay.
The Rossigers was one of the few that wasn't bought up. They wanted to stay there. But all the others were sold out to like Three Lakes Logging, owned a lot of them.
Oh, wow. So maybe
and,
the logging company sold that property?
And then eventually the logging companies in the 1930s, they started selling it off again.
Okay, got
As
it.
the smaller lots, yeah.
Thank you.
And actually the Holmquist mill, August Holmquist, they bought a lot of it too, and they had the cedar bolt. They logged it for cedar bolts, and they dammed up the lake. So the water level actually came up, and then they would release the water when they had cedar bolts in the spring, I guess, and so they could wash all the way down to Monroe. Yeah.
So I had a quick question also about Wonderland. So Wonderland was the resort on Flowing Lake, right?
Right.
And those, if any of you have ever paddleboarded out there or been out there, that slide, at least a few years ago, was still there. That crazy, steep, insane metal slide. And I paddleboard by it and go, I cannot believe anybody went down that slide. It looks so dangerous. Who would encourage their child to go down that slide, right?
Because it only had the little narrow rim on the side. You could flip off of the thing. And
Yes, I'm surprised that stuff is still there. So do you know who
oh,
owns that property now?
it's still the last family still owns it.
Oh, really?
And it's a beautiful place. I went out there when I was doing architectural work. I went out there and did a remodel thing on one of the buildings, and it's gorgeous. I mean, what family wouldn't love to have that
I'm
place out
surprised
there?
they haven't removed some of that play equipment though, because it's, as far as I know, like I said a few years ago, it's
Well,
still there.
the grandkids still gotta use it.
Oh, God. They'll get tetanus and everything else.
And that's, Bob Lass did eventually build his golf course that he'd always wanted above that, which was open for maybe 20 years or so.
Well, you answered so many of my questions. I've always wondered about that place, and I didn't know it was called Wonderland. But I've always, it looks like some creepy old, like a horror movie would be set there.
Yeah, the trees have really grown up, so it's a lot darker than it used to be.
Yeah, just that great presentation. Thank you so much. It's really
I think there was another one over here, was there? No? Okay, well, that's all I got.
We have lots of refreshments over here. We have